Sent me a text message. Not a phone call, not a conversation at the kitchen table we'd shared for 39 years. A text. Sylvia, I've just been told I'm inheriting Uncle Bernard's estate. We're talking about close to $2 million. I think it's time we went our separate ways. I'd like you out of the house by the end of the month. I read it 3 times. I was standing in the cereal aisle at the Sobeys on Morrison Road, holding a box of oatmeal I'd been buying for the same man for 4 decades. I put it back on the shelf. I walked to my car. I sat there for a long time without starting the engine. 39 years. I met my husband at a church social in Peterborough in the spring of 1985. He was funny then, quick with a joke, easy to laugh. The kind of man who remembered the names of everyone he'd ever met. I was 24 and working as a receptionist at a dental clinic. He was 27 and had just started a junior position at an insurance company. We married 11 months later. I wore my mother's veil. For a long time, things were fine. Not extraordinary, but fine. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood near the Utener by a river. We raised 2 children, a son who now lives in Calgary and a daughter who teaches elementary school about 20 minutes from where I still live. We had the usual disagreements. There were lean years when the furnace broke and Christmas was modest. There were good years, too. Vacations in Prince Edward Island. A trip to Portugal for our 25th anniversary that he still talks about to this day. Or talked about. I'm not sure anymore what tense to use when I think about him. The trouble started quietly, the way it usually does. About 4 years ago, my husband's Uncle Bernard, his mother's brother, a bachelor who'd spent his whole life accumulating property in northern Ontario, got very ill. Parkinson's, then dementia. He had no children of his own, no close friends left alive. My husband flew up to Sudbury twice to visit him in the care facility. He came back from those visits different, quieter, or maybe not quieter, more calculating. I noticed him on his laptop late at night. I noticed him taking phone calls in the backyard even in February, pacing in the snow in his socks. I asked him once what was going on. He said he was worried about his uncle. I believed him. I don't know exactly when she entered the picture, but I know it was sometime during those visits north. Her name, I would later find out, is Gwendolyn. She's 41. She worked at the care facility where Bernard was living. She has, as my daughter put it through gritted teeth, very long highlighted hair. I didn't know about Gwendolyn for another 2 years. What I knew was that my husband had changed. He started going to the gym, which he hadn't done since our son was born. He bought new clothes, not the practical kind, but the kind that require a reason. He started criticizing me in small ways that individually seemed like nothing, but together felt like a slow dismantling. My cooking was too heavy. I didn't dress well enough. I'd let myself go, he said once, and then immediately pretended he hadn't said it. I started to feel like a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of but didn't know how to get rid of. Still, I stayed. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself this was just what happened after 35 plus years. I told myself a lot of things, standing in front of the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning while he slept in. Then Uncle Bernard died in January, and everything moved very fast. My husband became distant in a way that no longer even pretended to be grief. He was on the phone constantly. He took a trip to Sudbury to deal with the estate and was gone for 6 days. He came back with a new watch. When I asked who had helped him navigate everything up there, he said a colleague. Said it so smoothly it almost didn't register. Almost. 3 weeks after he got back, he sent me that text from the cereal aisle. $2 million, and he did it by text. I drove home in a kind of fog. I walked into the house, our house, the one we'd bought together in 1994, the one I'd repainted twice and whose garden I'd spent 15 years cultivating, and I sat at the kitchen table. I didn't cry. I think I was too stunned to cry. I just sat there while the afternoon light moved across the floor, thinking about the word out. He'd said he wanted me out. like I was a tenant who'd overstayed. My daughter called that evening. She always calls on Tuesdays. I picked up and said, "Your father has asked me to leave the house." And there was a silence so long I thought the call had dropped. "He what?" I read her the text. She was quiet again. Then she said, "Mom, don't touch anything, don't sign anything, and call a lawyer tomorrow morning. First thing." My daughter teaches 9-year-olds, and she is, without question, the most clear-headed person I know. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed we'd shared for decades, and I made a list in my head. What did I have? What did I actually know? What could I protect? The house was in both our names. That much I knew. We'd renewed the mortgage twice together, and I'd contributed to every single payment from the income I'd earned at the dental clinic, and later, after I went back to school at 42, from my work as a medical transcriptionist. I had my own RRSP, modest but real. I had my pension from 22 years of contributions. I had the garden and the bookshelves and 39 years of a life I'd built alongside this man, and he had sent me a text message. The next morning I called a family lawyer named Ms. Osei Bonsu. My daughter had looked her up the night before, had read 3 years of Google reviews aloud to me over the phone like a bedtime story. Her office was in a low brick building downtown, plants in every windowsill, a water cooler in the corner that hummed. She was a calm woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a way of listening that made me feel like every word I said was being carefully filed somewhere useful. I told her everything: the text, the uncle, the inheritance, the new watch. Gwendolyn, whose existence I had by then confirmed through the particular cruelty of a shared streaming account he'd forgotten to log out of. Her name was right there in the profile list, her little icon, a photo of a sunset. Ms. Osei Bonsu listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and said, "All right, first things first. Does he know that you know about the other woman?" "No," I said. She nodded. "Good. Let's keep it that way for now." Then she explained some things to me that I wish someone had explained when I was 24 and standing in a church wearing my mother's veil. In Ontario, when a marriage ends, the default rule under the Family Law Act is equalization of net family property. What that means, she explained, is that both spouses calculate the value of everything they own, subtract the value of everything they owned on the day they got married, and then the spouse with the higher net gain pays the other spouse half the difference. It's not about whose name is on the title. It's not about who earned what. It's about what was accumulated together during the marriage. The inheritance itself, the $2 million from Uncle Bernard, was trickier. Under Ontario law, she explained, an inheritance received by one spouse is generally excluded from equalization as long as it stays separate, as long as it's not mixed with marital assets, as long as he doesn't deposit it into a joint account, or use it to pay down the shared mortgage, or buy things that benefit both of them. "Has he done any of those things yet?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "He only told me 3 weeks ago. Then we need to find out quickly." What happened over the next 2 months was the most exhausting and clarifying experience of my life. Miss Osei Bonsu's office sent a formal letter to my husband's lawyer. There were financial disclosures. There were documents I'd never known existed that I suddenly needed to locate, going through filing cabinet folders in the basement while my husband stayed at, I now understood, Gwendolyn's apartment in Sudbury. And then something interesting came out in the disclosure process. He had, in the weeks before sending me that text, transferred $40,000 from his inheritance into our joint account. He'd said it was to cover household expenses while things were being sorted out. It seemed like a gesture of fairness. It was, in fact, a mistake. Under Ontario law, when inheritance funds are mixed with marital property, even partially, even with good intentions, that portion can lose its excluded status. The $40,000 he put into our joint account had blurred the line. Miss Status. Osei Bonsu was very calm when she explained this to me. I was less calm. Not because I was angry, because for the first time in months, I understood that I was not as powerless as that text had made me feel. There was also the matter of the house. The house on the Otenabe had increased significantly in value since 1994. We'd bought it for $160,000, which felt enormous at the time, and it was now worth, by two independent appraisals, just over $800,000. That increase in value, the entirety of it, was subject to equalization. Both of our names were on the deed. Both of us had paid into it. My husband's plan, as relayed by his lawyer, was that he would buy me out at a figure he had apparently arrived at on his own, which was so far below half the appraised value that Ms. Osei-Bonsu said simply, "We'll decline that." My husband, it turned out, had done all of this without fully understanding the law. He'd inherited money and felt, I think, that it made him newly powerful, that it reset something. That $2 million from a bachelor uncle with Parkinson's disease somehow canceled out 39 years of a shared life. Men like that, Ms. Osei-Bonsu said carefully, not cruelly, just matter-of-factly, often make that mistake. I did not move out of the house. My daughter had been right about that too. I had no legal obligation to leave simply because he'd asked me to, and staying meant that the house remained, practically and legally, part of my life while the proceedings continued. I did move into the guest room, which felt strange for about a week, and then felt like a reasonable use of a room I'd always thought was wasted. I bought a small television for the dresser and started watching the documentary series I'd been meaning to watch for years. I slept better than I had in months. My husband came back from Sudbury twice during this period to collect things. The first time, he was businesslike and cold, the way he'd been for the last year of our marriage. The second time, something had shifted. He was quieter. He sat at the kitchen table, my kitchen table now, in the way it always should have been, and he said, "I didn't think it would be like this." I wasn't sure what "this" referred to. The process, the cost, the realization that a text message doesn't dissolve 39 years of shared property. I said, "I know." That was all. There wasn't anything else to say. The settlement took 8 months. There were moments when I wanted to give up, to take whatever they offered just to make it end. My son called from Calgary every Sunday and told me to hold on, that I'd put in too many years to settle for less than I deserved. My daughter drove over twice a week and we sat in the kitchen drinking tea, and she never once pretended it wasn't hard. She also never let me feel sorry for myself for too long, which is exactly the kind of daughter she is. In the end, the house was sold. I hadn't wanted to sell it. I'd thought for years that I'd grow old there, that I'd die there eventually, in a bedroom that looked out over the garden I'd planted, rows by rows. But the sale was the cleanest solution, and the equity was divided according to the equalization calculation. I received my share of the house, my full pension, my RRSPs, and because of the $40,000 my husband had moved into the joint account, a portion of the inheritance money he'd thought was entirely his. He didn't get everything he wanted, that's what I can say, and I didn't get everything I'd hoped for, which was 39 more years in a house by the river with a man I still, somewhere underneath all of it, had loved. I live now in a 2-bedroom condominium in Peterborough, about 2 kilometers from the house I grew up in. My daughter helped me pick it out. The second bedroom is for when my grandchildren visit. My son has 2, a boy of 7 and a girl who just turned 4, and calls me Grandma Seal, which is the best name I've ever been given. The balcony faces east, and in the mornings, I drink my coffee and watch the light come over the rooftops, and I think about what it means to start again at 63. It is not what I planned. I want to say that clearly. This is not the ending I wrote for myself in 1985, standing in my mother's veil. But it is a life. It is mine. And the woman who received that text in a grocery store aisle and sat in her car for half an hour, numb, holding nothing, That woman found out she was holding more than she knew. There's a rose bush in the garden of the house on the Atanabe. I planted it the year my daughter started kindergarten. I don't know what the new owners have done with it, but every spring I think about it blooming anyway, whether anyone's watching or not. That's what I think about now, when I think about those 39 years. Not the text, not the watch, not Gwendolyn, the rosebush blooming anyway.